Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Nita Little. So Nita is one of the founding figures in the contact improvisation world, works with activism, very thoughtful person in the dance world from what I can see. I'm in contact myself, and I kept asking around, I kept saying, you know, who's a deep person, who's working with psychology, who's a thinker, who's interesting in this field that we could get for the conference. And I think that Nita's name was the name that came up most often. So I said, you know what, ahead of the conference, I'd really like to interview her. So Nita, welcome.
Thank you. Mark, it's nice to get to know you.
Pleasure. Where are you in the world today?
I am in the Seattle area, out of the fires, thank God. West Coast fire. West Coast is on fire right now.
Glad you're okay. So how did you get interested in the body, Nita? How did it all start for you?
Oh my God. That's a question that takes me back to probably being 3 or 4 years old when there was no distinction between body and mind, and I was simply dancing. I was probably born dancing, and I have been dancing since then. And so there was never a time when I wasn't interested in it.
So dancing as a kid, did you become a professional dancer? Did you do any particular dance studies? What happened next?
And I have a fabulous dance background, got to study with some amazing teachers, everyone from Jose Limon to, I studied at the Graham Studios with Takako Asakawa, in ballet with Alfredo Corvino, Maggie Black. I have just classes with really Merce Cunningham stars. I really have a really wonderful and blessed background in contemporary dance, modern dance. And then I went to college, to Bennington College, and got to work with Judith Dunn and people who were interested in improvisation. Bill Dixon, black jazz musician. And they were partners. So I had that orientation into that kind of channel into dance improvisation. And from there met Steve Paxton. He was new faculty. And almost immediately, Steve and I started working in a studio, exploring those materials that became contact improvisation.
Okay, so this is the famous Steve Paxton. How was that in the early days, meeting him?
Oh, he was a beautiful Adonis, curly hair, in his 30s, early 30s, and had just come from working with Cunningham Company and worked with a fabulous improvisation company. And he was challenging and interesting. He also was an Aikido practitioner.
Right, that's my background. So when I first did contact, I was like, oh, it's like Aikido without the throws,
right. So he taught us some Aikido roles. There were 3 of us in a studio, quite frankly, me and 2 men. And Steve, we were exploring materials of being in touch. And so I learned Aikido roles. But then it immediately, of course, since our interest was not in manipulating each other, but rather in how is it we negotiate this moment, this incident. And that was a huge difference, even though the underlying principles, like such things as weight falls to the underside, those principles remain constant for both forms. The interiority of it is very, very different. The logic of it is very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's certainly the purpose of it as well. Like, what are we doing here? Even if there's shared sort of functional, structural type things, it's a very different activity.
Yeah, extremely different. So my interest is in how did it get born? How did it get born? What was the idea or the initial? Well, as I said, I had been interested in improvisational scores. And so in Steve's very first class, it was a compositional class, he said, bring in something you've been working on. And I'd been working on this negotiation between two people coming together. I'd made a piece, two people coming together down on the floor and having to negotiate who would end up being on top of the other person standing. You know, so one person is standing, the other person is on their shoulders or higher. And then that decomposes back down to the ground and they go out. And so I was struggling with this construction, this improvisation, what we would call a score. And I wasn't really struggling with it, but I had questions about it. And he said, let me take you into a studio and show you how not to get bruised. So we went to a studio with a young man I was working with who really wasn't a dancer yet, but was learning. And we started to work on that kind of set up an inquiry that then, of course, proceeded and went much further than my tiny little score. Because it's that context that we started to investigate, how is it people come together and stay together?
Right. And in terms of, it's difficult because I'm sure we'll get into it. It's this moving, evolving thing. But in terms of when people say, what's contact improv? For non-dancers, you might not know technical terms. Would that be the study of how people come together and move together, how people make contact? I mean, in some ways, it's an incredible simple idea, right? At the beginning,
contact weight makes it not so simple.
Shared weight, right? But if you were to describe it, I've seen people say, look, here's the basic idea, not the practice of it, of course, but the basic idea people can convey quite quickly in the sense that it's not a complicated notion like, I don't know, capoeira or something.
Yeah, it is. One could say that it is a dance sport. Terms a woman, Dina DeVita, coined, but I think Steve used a lot to describe the structure in which people come together in sharing weight, in physical contact, remaining in physical contact through a duration. And they, sorry, my phone just rang and I thought I had it stop. And they and together they negotiate movement that takes them into having to manage together the physics of motion. So we work with momentum together. We work with weight and supports, the vast variety of structures that can arise while you are in physical touch. So it looks something like it's not wrestling because you're not fighting, you're not trying to undo one another, but you're certainly in as deep a contact. It's not manipulation. One of the early agreements was that we do not manipulate one another. I do not make your choices for you. I can communicate to you possibilities, but I do not make your choices. So unlike partnering at the time that was going on, a man was not lifting a woman up into the air. We don't lift one another. In fact,
do things people as such, right? This is in some ways quite radical. You don't pick a person up, do a thing to a person, throw them on the floor. It's always a conversation, right?
Exactly. We do not do things to each other. We offer the possibility that someone could be above and be on top of another person. One person could be supporting, the other person could be flying.
So it can look quite dramatic, like body surfing, or it could be very gentle and rolling on the floor. There's all these possibilities, right? Depending on the mood and the dancers and everything between.
Exactly. It's actually quite stunning at times. And the physics of it make it look terrifying to people because they aren't inside able to hear the interior conversation that's taking place, which is happening within milliseconds.
This mutual listening, and I've always found it a wonderful practice for developing sensitivity, for really tuning in to each other. And that mutual listening makes it much safer than it could be. I was always surprised how few injuries there are in contact, given, this sort of what could be quite extreme situations, right?
Exactly. I mean, I don't think I've ever had a real injury, and I've done some wild things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the agreements of any art, I think, are almost the sort of the rules, so the agreements there are what?
Oh, I have had one injury.
Okay, one.
I had one injury. I'm just remembering this one injury. I was teaching in Italy. I met a guy who did contact tango or tango contact. And he immediately took me and flipped me. I mean, with force up on around his, and my arm was not in a position that could manage that. So he totally strained my arm, and that's why we don't manipulate.
Right.
There's no leader and follower in contact. It's not a tango dance in that sense.
Okay. So if there's no leader and follower, people might go, well, how does it work? What would you say to that?
You are offering, the moment offers possibilities and potentials that you are together sharing as much as you know about that moment and those potentials, and somebody's making a choice. Now, it is true. I've seen contact, because now contact's nearly 50 years old. Mm-hmm. And of course, me? Don't take that too far. So interior to those moments, one is listening, one is communicating possibilities, and one is saying, sometimes you're saying no, sometimes you're saying yes.
Declining offers, making offers.
You have to feel the embodiment of one another. What is, and this is where my work comes in. You have to listen to what the other person is attending to. You have to be hearing their attention, which is physical, the physicality of their attention. And so even since the very, very early days, I've been interested in how the mind is embodied. And I eventually went and got a PhD because I had learned so much, and I wanted to know, what did the world know about the embodiment of the mind? And I discovered they don't know that much. I mean, they know a fair amount in terms of neurology, but there's a whole vast swaths of how that works out as in practice that I think is completely unknown or not recognized. So has been my work. My work is very much about the embodiment of attention, or rather the articulation of presence. How is it we are present?
And where do you fall on that sort of body-mind question then? Some people are more into the philosophy of this. Obviously, anyone listening to something called the Embodiment Podcast has probably got some sense of body-mind holism or mind-body integration. Where do you kind of fall on that?
I live within this span of theory and practice. I take practice and speak of it in theory, and can speak in terms of it theoretically or in practical terms. Mm-hmm. So that's why I went back to get the PhD, because I'm a practice-based person.
And this is an interesting thing about contact, as if we talk about the culture of contact, I think it's very interesting as well, compared to, make comparisons, but it has a journal. It has Contact Quarterly, and contact people often when they're speaking are, there's almost quite intellectual and quite thoughtful, and they'll talk about research, for example. They mean that term slightly differently than most people would understand it, I think. But there's a culture around sort of, research and journals and things like this, which is not the case in, say, tango.
Right. Well, yes. We can't talk about the Contact Quarterly without invoking the name of my beloved friend, the late Nancy Stark-Smith, who was the primary editor. She was editor with Lisa Nelson. And the Contact Quarterly has just undergone a big shift to being an online-only publication. In Nancy's lifetime, it was always a hardbound, solid piece that is actually a very beautiful journal, if you ever catch one. So yeah, but when you talk about research, I just wrote a paper actually with Colleen Bartley about the birth of contact and the fact that contact is based in research from the very earliest days, those days when I was talking to you about, which I was telling you about when we were in a studio, three of us exploring what this could be. How is it that how is it we stay together? That was an act of inquiry in every moment. That then took us all, Steve got a grant, and we ended up doing a performance piece with a whole bunch of people doing contact improvisation. Of course, they had to be taught contact improvisation at this point. It then had a name. Steve took me into the office, met him in the office one time, and he said, "What do you think about calling this contact improvisation?" And I said, "Yeah."
What were the other alternatives? Was there anything else on the table? Was it going to be called?
No, not that.
It was always contact improv. Was it going to be called wake flow or something else?
Not that he told me about. We went straight for that, I guess. So he brought all these people together, young dancers. They were all college age, mostly. There was Trisha Brown, Barbara Dilley came, people from the Grand Union joined us. But we performed for 5 days, 5 hours a day in a gallery setting. On mats, on Aikido mats, which was very different than what we had been doing in a studio.
Yeah, studio I've done makes a difference. Yeah. Very different when this both. Yeah. So there's this element of inquiry, and this I think is really maybe obvious to some contact dancers, but it's a bit unique, or at least unusual, that it's an ongoing piece of research around the world with different people that take it in different directions. It's growing. It was very deliberately not copyrighted, unlike a lot of things.
Very not copyrighted. Yeah.
It flows, it evolves. There isn't a qualification. Like you can't, do a teacher training in contact improv as far as I know. I've never seen one advertised. And it has this ongoing, evolving research quality to it as a sort of loose body of work and a loose community. And that's a bit different than most things that tend to be great. This is 5 rhythms. This is Aikido. People tend to put fences around things much more.
Yeah, and when they put fences around things tend to they stop at that point, and then people do these efforts and to stretch it. But in contact, that it's this very soft boundary, the soft edge, which, right now, for instance, there's this discussion about touch and play. Is it contact? Is it not contact? And I'm perfectly happy with touch and play being emergent from contact improvisation, which I think it is. Is it contact improvisation? I would say no, to the degree that they
element to it, right? It's got this sexual element to it. It's much more rough practice. It's
got this real inquiry into sensuality that is sexuality, that has this dive into sexuality. And And contact improvisation is not sensual, but the dive is not into the sexual. The dive is into communication.
Right.
What is it here that we can attend to that takes us into a deeper and more profound ability to move well together, to explore a world of motion together? It does not have an end result in sexuality, for instance, or maybe I shouldn't say that as an end result, but it does not go that direction. And the issue for me with touch and play is the second you take a contact moment and that sensuality and you start to edge it towards this kind of sexual chemistry, the orientation, the ability to listen to certain levels of, for instance, the level of subtlety that embodied attention takes. If I'm inside your body with my attention, and that's a physical action, that's a tactile action, I'm really deeply listening inside you. What am I listening for? I'm listening for what it is you can know and how you can know it, and what the choices you're making, your relationship to the earth. All of these things are ways that I can come to speak to you without words. And that's a growing area of inquiry. That, for me, is an expanding area of inquiry that gets completely rerouted by sexual energy, because sexual energy will take all of it and curve it into a particular direction.
Different focus. And what are you paying attention to now? What are you interested in when you dance with someone after all these years?
Wow, so many levels, but I am interested in how contact does not necessarily require skin-to-skin touch. That where does this contact begin? The contact can begin here, for instance. My one hand can feel the presence of the other hand. I'm interested in how is it that presence acts?
How is it that presence acts?
I'm interested in the articulation of presence, both within another body. So where's the presence of one hand present inside another body? And my body present inside another body, someone else present within me. How do I know? But also as a spatial phenomenon. What is it that's happening with presence here? And that takes a really finely tuned sense of embodiment.
Break from the interview to tell you about our shop and a deal we've got on there, and also about some events that are coming up. So if you go to embodiedfacilitator/shop and use the code podcast50 is the code, you can get 50% off anything in the shop. And what have we got on there? How to design training, trauma for facilitators, breath work, leadership, resilience, life purpose. There's a bunch of books, there's a bunch of e-courses, mostly for facilitators, trainers, coaches, yogis, different ebooks, but that code will give you 50% out off anything at all there in the shop. So that could save you, let's say, up to £100, which is about $120. So well worth having that code. Go to embodiedfacilitator.com/shop. Also on that website, you will see embodiedfacilitator.com/events-calendar. Just look under events under the main title. You'll see all the stuff we've got coming up for events. We regularly have free online events. If you're interested in embodiment, we have them on coaching, life purpose, marketing, or trauma, all sorts of things. So have a look at the events page. You can see the different one-day events we've got coming up related to the conference and all kinds of other stuff. Okay, so all of that is on embodiedfacilitator.com. And remember that code there. That code is podcast50 if you want 50% off anything. There you go. A good deal. Back to the interview. So, embodiment, why is it important to you? What's the why in there for you?
Everything we can know, everything we can feel requires a body. Mm-hmm. There are bodies that are concurrently, simultaneously mind. So I think of the body not as a body and mind, but as body mind. And I'm looking at that territory where language cannot distinguish between is that body or is that mind that is acting. We tend to attribute certain things to mind and other things to body. But there's this territory where you can't tell because it's both. so finely, I mean, think of body mind as this continuum. I think of it as a Mobius strip. It looks like it's two sides, but in fact, it's one side. Mm-hmm. And if you stop that Mobius strip at any point, you discover two sides, mind and body. But in motion, it's going to only be a one-sided structure. And that's what living is like. We're one-sided structures, mind bodies, not bodies with minds. And that territory where you can't tell, is this mind or body functioning, is very juicy.
Do you mean some of the more sort of subtle things, like when you're partnered with someone, is that intention? Is that actually a subtle movement? Who knows, right? It kind of, how do I know that they want to move in that direction? Am I feeling a subtle shift?
If you can feel the movement of the mind tactily, as a tactile phenomenon. For me, I've wrote a paper with a colleague, Joe Dumont, on the tactility of attention. It's coming out in a book out of the UK, probably this year. But attention is tactile. So can I feel the tactility of your attention within my own form or within the spaces? I mean, think of being at a traffic light and turning around and not knowing why you're turning around, but seeing that somebody's looking at you.
Yeah, there's a number of phenomena like that, some of which are fairly well documented. That's
where you can't tell, is it mind or body? What got set off? What did you know?
It's interesting how people develop sensitivity to this, and I've heard snipers talk about it. I've also heard, definitely martial artists who play with this quite a lot. Paul Linden being one, intention, where that becomes bodily. Is it mental? Is it bodily? Who knows? It's both. It's neither. And certainly having a practice where one can explore that, I think the levels of subtlety one can become apparent to by tuning into someone else are unusual and not necessarily commonsensical to most people.
But when you get to them, they lead to really this profound trust, because if you're dancing with someone and you can communicate it, and that level of communication is happening, there is this thing that just clicks in, and you understand that you have this really profound trust with someone. And you can have that kind of sense of profound trust with an environment or with a world.
Say more about that. So like we're talking about the world, we're even potentially moving into the political space here. I know that's something you messaged me about before. So, the sort of so what here, I think, is very interesting.
Yeah, the so what. Yeah, why? So why does embodiment matter? Why does it matter that I am that I live in a form that refuses to remain simply limited to my flesh? When my flesh is not the only Nita there is, when Nita, in fact, is a space of being, because attention is tactile, I'm not a specific, limited, just this little object of being, right? That mind and body, mind has mind is not distinct from body in the sense that it acts, mind acts in the world. And if I walk into an environment with, and you raised the word intention, if I walk into an environment angry and dark and concentrated in my sensibility, I completely alter the space that I'm in. Not just because I'm gloomy, because people can see me, they can feel me. And that's not just happening with their eyes, is it? And so understanding our responsibility being two words, being, and I'm speaking from Karen Barad's inquiry, and she's a anthropologist, feminist, looking at science and looking very specifically at such things as quantum theory. But she speaks about our responsibility, this entangled state we are in with one another. And that entanglement is really critical to our work. to our being in the world and my work. I'm very interested in what is it that I do that can make this world a more lively, vital, and engaged place. And how does my presence really change what is possible? That's responsibility. Me, not just with the human world, but me with the non-human world, the world. And to do that, I have to understand I'm human and non-human. I am not, all parts of me are not human. If I look at myself on the scale of water, and I am what percentage water? I mean, a vast percentage of me is water. Then that is water human? No, it's not. So really having an inquiry into what the human is, because that speaks profoundly to what it is possible for us to do in a world in which we are not separate and cleanly and clearly individuated. Individuation is highly overrated. Experiencing selfhood as a multiplicity is a profound action that comes from contact improvisation, from my work with contact improvisation. I can experience myself as many, which means that when I'm together with somebody else, that experience is simply enhanced. I easily move the boundaries of my being, easily and flexibly. Does that mean I have to stay there? Absolutely not. I need to be able to individuate, but I've done that. I did that years ago. It's not the only state I can live in.
It is interesting, isn't it, that practices of contact, whether they be, dance practices, martial arts practices, anything, I think that's really interested in listening and connection, ultimately that you realize the barriers of the self are slightly fuzzier than initially thought. And that can be...
Yes.
That can be pretty profound for people when they start realizing that. And it doesn't have to be a profound sexual experience or some sort of mystical experience. It can become quite an ordinary everyday thing to realize that this is the case. As you say, that your mind is influencing things, that those barriers are not quite as solid as may have been presented to us.
Right. And in a world in crises, it is really seems to be significant and important for us to start to amplify our abilities to be present in a world that really needs us to act differently, to stop this stupidity of our individuation, because our individuation does make us stupid as physical beings. It makes us dull to one another.
Illusion of disconnection. Illusion of disconnection. And sometimes people ask me about why embodiment, why the embodiment conference, whatever. And I say, well, when we're connected to ourselves, when that's the first presence, right? We can actually really connect to others, connect to what we care about, connect to the planet. These things are connected, right? Like this is one almost synonym for embodiment is connection.
Yeah. So I have an institute that I developed a few years ago, 2016, called the Institute for the Study of Somatic Communication. We call it the ISSC. And the Institute is a network of dance ensembles, dancers who are researchers into that connection you're talking about. We work together as ensembles in different cultures. It's an expanding network, so we're slowly but surely entering into other cultures. So we're in right now. We've got 2 ensembles in Germany, 1 in the UK, 1 happening in Spain, 1 happening in Denmark. We've got another happening in one that might happen in Italy eventually. They're just sprouting. And these are ensembles who right now we have, because of COVID, we have a virtual, what we call collaboratory. The ensembles are collaboratories. And we have a virtual collaboratory just about to start to study the speed of attention. Because if you want to communicate, you have to be able to understand not only the speed of your own attention, but the speed of the attention of the person that you're engaged with, or the person, thing, whatever. you're engaged with. And an ability to change the speed of your attention is a really important skill. So looking at the skills involved.
Okay, the speed of attention. Say more what you mean by that, the speed of attention. What does it mean?
The speed of attention?
Yeah.
So, in so many movement forms, people say that they want no mind, stop the mind. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of not what we want. That's actually, the mind is not the issue. It's the speed of your attention that's the issue. And if you are in a boat on a stream, right, the water's coming down, and you drop something outside of the boat, your hat falls off, it's in the water. The stream is moving at the same speed that you're moving at. If you're moving at the speed of the water, you can just reach out and pick it up, right? Because there is no friction happening between you and that boat. You're one action. If you stop the boat, or if you move faster or slower than the water, that's not the case. If thinking of the mind as that stream, if you are moving at the speed of your attention, of that motion, if you're moving, your attention is moving at the same speed as your physical body is moving, now you can't feel any mind. You simply don't. There's no friction there. The mind and the moment, the world you're in, your actions in the world are happening at the same speed. And it feels like no mind. But in fact, what you want is this incredible, expansive ability to be present to not only the water, but everything else that's going on. And that's what it feels like when people reach for that no mind place. Not stopping the mind, but catching up with it, moving at that speed. So it doesn't mean we move our bodies really, really fast. We have to learn to engage our attention to various speeds so that if I'm moving really, really slowly, I can be right in time with my action. I can move and be present in a depth of presence, a depth of awareness, and not be in what I would call chunky time. I would be thin slicing time. So having temporal skills is really important to being able to be in communion with the world. And communion is what I'm really interested in. How is it we can act in communion?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where does your passion come from? I've seen you light up a number of times in this interview and almost self-generated. I don't think I asked you any particularly good questions. So you just kind of have a passion clearly for it. Like I'm curious where your passion comes from.
Wow. That I can't quite say. I think it comes from realizing that there is so much to know that we don't know. I feel like I'm right at the edge of this profound awakening that I'm working terribly hard to know more. What's here? What's here? What's here? If you live a life of inquiry, and I've been blessed in that, thanks to Contact Improvisation, to be living a life of inquiry, then I am never without something to be fascinated about.
I'm really curious about a life of contact. You said it's been around 50 years. You were there at the start. You're clearly a young woman when you started, and it's an unusual life. We mentioned Steve Paxton. He's still dancing. I saw him dance in Portugal last year, actually, so I know he's still dancing.
He's gorgeous. It's so great.
Some of the senior people in the field, like Nancy Stark-Smith, you mentioned, passed away. I was booked in for a dance retreat with her this winter, but sadly that won't be happening. And, you have had a life of contact, a life of dancing and doing workshops and inquiring and all these things we've talked about. How's that been?
Oh, golly, I'm blessed, aren't I? I mean, I meet amazing, wonderful people. I am always interested to hear how is it that people are understanding their worlds. I understand, by the way, I also am an NLP master practitioner coach. So I have that kind of, and that started in the early days of contact, by the way. That was an ability to reframe things, which was very important to studying, to inquiry. I have had the opportunity to never not be interested, never settle, never get bored, never understand and seek repetition. I really enjoy the flow. My teacher is, does it work in contact? Does it work with bodies? Does it work in relations? Does it work? And how does what's physical work in the emotional world? How does the emotional world influence the mental world? How does our mental world influence the emotional world, the embodied world? It's this extraordinary, for me, intertwining of perspectives. Where am I looking from this time? There's always a new perspective, and new perspective will give me a new information.
Listeners can't see this, but it's actually very interesting. I'd go to the YouTube channel and watch this one, because you'll do something in your body and then you'll have the word. It's very interesting. You're doing intertwining and your body was doing it, and then you were kind of like, oh, what's my, and then you started showing it and then it formed and then you said the word. As an interviewer, it's fascinating because most people are the other way around. They have thought and then they do something with their hands to try and express it, whereas it's like coming from the other direction. It's quite fascinating to see throughout the interview. But I guess a life of study. What's your vision then for the future? We're not done yet. So what's your vision?
Well, the vision is to give it, it's a giveaway dance. I give away. My vision is, can I set this particular inquiry about attention, about presence into motion with ensembles so that we become a more responsible world altogether, not dominated by any one culture, but that we are in communication with one another in order to accomplish this really important work as a world.
Thank you for your body of work. Thank you for ongoing work. It's appreciated. I look forward to listening to your session at the conference, the Embodiment Conference. And I hope I get a chance to dance with you one day. I was booked into Freiburg to dance this year, and that didn't happen because of COVID and other things. So, it is what it is. Hey, practicing non-attachment this year for sure. Where do people find you? Like, if they want to look you up, they want to read your stuff, they want to look at video, they want to meet up with you in real life even, where do they go?
Yeah, so as you probably have figured out, Mark, my website is under construction right now. And so is the ISSC website, by the way. So I'm working on two websites simultaneously. And I think the easiest way is to go to my Facebook page, Nita Little Relational Intelligence. It's my Facebook page. I'm teaching relational intelligence online on Wednesdays in the morning Pacific time. You can find out about it there, Nita Little Relational Intelligence. I will put things like the Embodiment Conference there when my session is happening. I'm very excited about that, Mark. What a marvelous project you have. It's really quite...
I'm deep in it at the moment. I'll tell you, it's right now. It's crazy, but we just launched the computer system, which means that we can sort of structure all the different speakers and have people find what they want and make some sense of the big mess that it could be otherwise. So having the technology in place now is really special, and it's an amazing thing to offer people in this time when we maybe can't, dance or get together in person.
Well, it's a great project, and it's great to really bring embodied, we talk about embodiment as if it were a single thing. It's not. There are many embodiments, and most people live diminished embodiments. And my job, let's figure out what the potentials are of embodiment, because I don't think we know them.
Right, just beginning, the silos are just starting to talk to each other. Like I meet people and they'll say, "Oh, who's Steve Paxton?" I'm like, "Really? Okay," and they'll be embodiment people, So it's if we can break some of this down, we're getting it translated into a whole bunch of languages as well, so that we're available in Spanish, German, and Russian, all sorts of things. So some stuff that we can make global, maybe for the first time. So, do you have a closing message about the body, Nita? Just finish us off here. Closing message.
Well, yeah, I would say that the embodiment, whatever it is an ongoing inquiry. There is no conclusion. There is no point at which you've arrived at embodiment. It is something that is, because we are body minds, we are this constant expanding structure. We are also neuroplastic, which means we're an expanding structure in which our neurons are constantly changing. What we think we can be requires imagination, because the neurons are going to grow with that. Our neuronal potentials. You have to be able to envision it to do it. So the world as it exists is not enough.
The world is not enough. It's a James Bond film, but I love it. I've loved your passion, your wisdom. I'm going to have to listen to this one back, because I think I didn't get everything the first. A bit tired today, so I want to listen to it back and understand it a bit deeper. And if I possibly can, I'll be at your session at the conference, Nita. So thank you so much for joining us.
Mark. Thank you for this opportunity.
Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So please go there. On the embodiedfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. Most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedfacilitator.com, you can see the actual links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment Podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodiedfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you.